My name is Evelyn Hart. I'm 59. On the 28th of December, my brother called me from our parents' kitchen in Rochester, Minnesota. He said the New Year's Eve dinner had turned into a shareholder networking event. And my presence would make people uncomfortable. He said it like he was canceling a dentist appointment. I stared at the photo on my fridge. Me, 30 years younger, flour on my face, surrounded by the same family. By the time I hung up, I wasn't in that photo anymore. I was the part someone had cropped out. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I just said, I understand. Even though I understood far more than he realized. He thought he was pushing aside an older sister who no longer mattered. What he didn't know was that I had spent 27 years building the company he now used as a stage. And I had finally stopped confusing blood with loyalty. I spent New Year's Eve alone in my apartment. Then just after midnight, my parents called, their voices shaking, asking me what was on the news. Before I tell you why, tell me something first. What time is it where you are and where are you watching from? I always wonder how far a story like this can travel. When people hear what happened later, they always assume the betrayal started with one dramatic moment. One signature, one lie, one dinner table explosion. It didn't. It started the way family betrayals usually start. Small enough to dismiss, repeated long enough to normalize. I founded Blackthorn Analytics 27 years earlier with 2 other risk analysts in a rented office above a shuttered bookstore on the east side of Rochester. We were building behavioral anomaly matrices for mid-size financial institutions long before that phrase sounded glamorous enough for investors to repeat in podcasts. I wrote the first core detection models myself, lived on gas station coffee, slept under my desk twice a week, and learned very early that when a woman builds something from the ground up, people admire her right up until the moment they can imagine taking it from her. My brother Lucas joined the company much later, after business school, after polished suits, after learning how to smile with all his teeth while saying absolutely nothing. He was 10 years younger than me, charming in rooms where I was direct, quick with people in ways I never cared to be. At first, I was proud of him. I thought he would strengthen what I had built. Instead, he studied it. He learned which investors responded to confidence more than competence, which board members preferred a clean story over a complicated truth, and which family members could be trained to repeat his version of reality if he fed it to them slowly enough. The first real warning came at a winter cabin weekend on Lake Superior. He asked me about the matrix I had been developing in silence for 2 years. He framed it like admiration. So, how are you getting the model to flag layered behavior patterns without drowning analysts in false positives? It was the kind of question only someone paying close attention would ask. I answered more than I should have. Not source code, not enough to replicate it cleanly, but enough to sketch the architecture. I remember seeing the reflection of his phone screen in the glass door for half a second before he pocketed it. At the time, I told myself I was imagining it. Weeks later, I found phrases from that conversation in an internal strategy memo that had my brother's name all over it and mine nowhere. Not identical, not enough for a simple accusation, but close enough to make my stomach drop. When I confronted him, he smiled and said we were aligned thinkers. That was his favorite trick. He never denied the theft. He dissolved it, turned it into overlap, synergy, shared vision. Then he got to my parents before I did. Suddenly, I was hearing that I had become difficult, territorial, unwilling to share, maybe a little bitter about getting older in a young industry. My mother asked me why I couldn't just be happy Lucas was good with people. My father said I had always been brilliant but lacked polish. I had built the machine they were now applauding, and somehow the family conversation had become about my tone. What made it worse was that part of me still wanted to believe I was overreacting. That is the cruelty of betrayal by family. Your instincts scream long before your heart will testify. So, I started documenting quietly. Email threads, meeting notes, timestamp development logs, repository snapshots, voice memos after every strange conversation. I met with an intellectual property attorney in St. Paul under the excuse of a compliance conference and spent 4 straight hours creating the paper trail I should have created much earlier. He told me something I still remember word for word. The most dangerous thief is the one who believes access is ownership. I signed every document with shaking hands, not because I doubted Lucas anymore, but because I hated what accepting the truth meant. It meant my brother did not simply want success. He wanted a version of success where I became invisible inside my own life. And still, because families train us to hope against evidence, I gave him one more chance. I agreed to attend a private strategy meeting at Meridian Risk and kept my explanation high level. I never gave him the proprietary framework. I never gave him the model weights or training pathways, but I underestimated how much a clever opportunist can steal from edges, structure, and confidence alone. He did not need the whole thing. He only needed enough to sell the illusion that it was already his. If you have ever been made to feel paranoid for protecting what you built, you know the loneliness of that stage. You begin asking yourself whether you are cold, selfish, ungenerous. In truth, you are usually just standing alone a few minutes ahead of the lie. The moment I stopped doubting myself arrived in Chicago in November, though I was not supposed to be there. Lucas told me the annual investor gala was a closed-door event, routine, nothing strategic, mostly networking and donor maintenance. I might have believed him if he had not looked so pleased while saying it. That night, I was in my apartment reheating soup I barely wanted when a former colleague texted me a LinkedIn live stream link with one message: "Were you aware of this?" I clicked and there he was on a stage under sapphire lighting with the Meridian Risk logo spinning behind him, accepting an Industry Innovation Award for a transformational predictive compliance engine that was unmistakably based on the system I had built. He did not say my name once. He thanked the board, the advisory team, his wife, even our parents for teaching him resilience. Then he clicked through slides that made my chest go cold. Not just broad concepts this time. He had my structural language, my flagging hierarchy, my prioritization logic, even one visual metaphor I had used in a private note months earlier comparing hidden financial risk to weather forming below the radar line. I sat frozen on my couch while the comments flooded the live stream. Visionary. Brilliant. Future of compliance. And then the camera cut to the banquet tables where my parents were smiling like they had personally engineered him. That was the night something in me hardened. Not into rage. Rage burns too hot and too fast. What settled into me was precision. The moment I stopped doubting myself arrived in Chicago in November, though I was not supposed to be there. Lucas told me the annual investor gala was a closed-door event, routine, nothing strategic, mostly networking and donor maintenance. I might have believed him if he had not looked so pleased while saying it. That night, I was in my apartment reheating soup I barely wanted when a former colleague texted me a LinkedIn live stream link with one message: "Were you aware of this?" I clicked and there he was on a stage under sapphire lighting with the Meridian Risk logo spinning behind him, accepting an Industry Innovation Award for a transformational predictive compliance engine that was unmistakably based on the system I had built. He did not say my name once. He thanked the board, the advisory team, his wife, even our parents for teaching him resilience. Then he clicked through slides that made my chest go cold. Not just broad concepts this time. He had my structural language, my flagging hierarchy, my prioritization logic, even one visual metaphor I had used in a private note months earlier comparing hidden financial risk to weather forming below the radar line. I sat frozen on my couch while the comments flooded the live stream. Visionary. Brilliant. Future of compliance. And then the camera cut to the banquet tables where my parents were smiling like they had personally engineered him. That was the night something in me hardened. Not into rage. Rage burns too hot and too fast. What settled into me was precision. I called my attorney first. Then I called a journalist I trusted, a woman in New York I had met years before on a panel about regulatory ethics and invisible labor in tech. Her name was Mara Jensen, and she had the kind of mind that did not get seduced by charm. I told her I was not ready to speak on record yet, but I wanted her to understand what I had. By the end of that call, she had gone very quiet. Then she said, "Evelyn, if your documentation is what you say it is, this is not a family dispute. This is a fraud story wearing a family costume." That sentence changed everything for me. At the same time, Lucas escalated the isolation at home. Thanksgiving approached and I heard nothing. No invitation, no schedule, no vague excuse, nothing at all. On Thanksgiving morning, I opened social media and found a professionally shot carousel of my family gathered at our parents' rented lake house in Florida. Matching linen, curated laughter, candles, expensive tableware, and Lucas at the center carving turkey like some benevolent king. My mother had captioned it, "Grateful for the ones who show up for each other." I stared at that sentence for a very long time. It is amazing how cruelty becomes most visible when someone decorates it. That same weekend, I made the real decision. I would not only expose what Lucas had done, I would remove the ground beneath the version of reality he was standing on. I called 2 senior engineers who had quietly left Meridian Risk over the past 3 years after complaining, off the record, that leadership kept burying the people doing actual work. One was in Minneapolis, the other in Denver. Both had watched Lucas rise by presenting other people's labor like polished strategy. Both said yes before I finished my offer. Within 2 weeks, we had the skeleton of a new company, Blackthorn Analytics. Not flashy, not sleek, just honest. We designed it around the matrix Lucas had tried to parade as his breakthrough. Except this time it would go to market under the name of the person who had actually built it. People like to imagine revenge as one explosive act. But the most effective revenge is often administrative. Contracts, logs, witnesses, backups, dates. If anger is thunder, documentation is climate. By early December, Mara had seen enough evidence to begin building her piece under embargo. My attorney had letters ready for the board, for investors, for Meridian Risk's outside counsel. I had secured independent validation of my original development timeline from 2 academic specialists and 3 archive test environments. There would be no misunderstanding defense left when this broke. Then Lucas called 3 days before New Year's and told me not to come. He said the house would be full of clients, board contacts, people who might feel awkward given my recent tension with him. Recent tension. As if I were the social problem in a room full of theft. I listened until he finished, then asked one question. "Does Mom know you're saying this to me?" He paused a little too long before answering. We all agreed it would be easier. That was the moment I understood something I had resisted for years. Lucas might have started the betrayal, but my parents had chosen the comfort of his version. Sometimes the deepest wound is not that one person harms you. It is that everyone else finds it more convenient to call the harm complicated. After that call, I sent Mara a 2-word message. Green light. I authorized my attorney to deliver the investor packets at 11:50 p.m. on New Year's Eve. I set Blackthorn Analytics' quiet launch for 12:01 am. And then, I made dinner for 1, sat in my apartment with a glass of red wine I barely tasted, and waited for midnight to tell the truth. New Year's Eve was almost unbearably ordinary until it wasn't. That is what I remember most. The dishwasher humming, snow collecting on the balcony rail, a single candle burning beside the sink because I couldn't stand how empty the apartment looked without some small act of defiance against the dark. Around 9:30, I almost called everything off. Not because Lucas deserved mercy, but because I suddenly pictured the blast radius too clearly. My parents waking up to headlines, Meridian Risk employees who had nothing to do with this losing security, my niece hearing adults whisper. When justice arrives, it never knocks only on the guilty door. Then my phone buzzed with a message from a junior analyst still at Meridian. Someone I had mentored years earlier. He had sent a photo from the New Year's Eve party at my parents' house. Lucas was standing in front of a projection screen giving what looked like another investor mini presentation between cocktails, and behind him, in giant blue letters, were the words "The Future of Financial Trust." Lucas Hart. My engine. My years. My work. His name. Something inside me became very calm after that. I typed back, "Thank you. Delete this message." Then I closed my eyes, breathed once, and let the clock keep moving. At 11:57 p.m., Mara texted me that the article was loaded and scheduled. At 11:58, my attorney confirmed the board packet had been delivered. At 11:59, Blackthorn Analytics' website went live in stealth mode. I stood by the window, watching snow fall between the buildings, and thought about the first winter I had built Meridian Risk from a folding table and a borrowed server. Thought about every room where I had been told to smile more, simplify more, step back more, trust more. Thought about every time I had accepted being diminished in order to keep the peace. Midnight came quietly. Then my phone detonated. First, a string of email notifications, then text messages, then missed calls stacking so fast the screen blurred. Mara's article hit exactly at 12 a.m. The headline was brutal in the cleanest possible way. Meridian Risk executive accused of misrepresenting sister's proprietary risk matrix as company innovation. The piece contained timeline evidence, internal documents, investor materials, expert validation, and a statement from my counsel confirming formal action. It did not read like gossip. It read like gravity. 1 minute later, Blackthorn Analytics' launch statement posted publicly with my name attached as founder and lead architect. At 12:04, the first investor statement hit. At 12:06, Lucas called. I let it ring twice before answering. The first thing I heard was noise. Voices, glass, footsteps, the unmistakable sound of a room collapsing socially in real time. Then Lucas, breathless and furious. "What did you do?" I remember looking at my reflection in the black window as I answered. "I told the truth." He started shouting immediately. Defamation, malice, family, timing, New Year's. He kept grabbing at every moral word available because facts were no longer on his side. Then I heard my father in the background asking what was happening and my mother saying my name like it had just become dangerous in her mouth. At 12:11, my father called me from his own phone. I answered because I wanted to hear who he was when Lucas was no longer narrating the world for him. His voice was shaking. "Evelyn," he said, "what's on the news?" There was a lifetime inside that question. Not what happened. Not did Lucas do this. Not are you okay. Just the stunned confusion of people who have mistaken comfort for truth for so long they cannot recognize reality when it finally walks in uninvited. I told him to read the article fully before saying another word to me. My mother got on the line next, already crying, asking why I would do this tonight of all nights. I said, because Lucas thought tonight would protect him. Then I hung up. More calls came. Investors, former colleagues, reporters, 2 board members, 1 woman from compliance who simply texted, "I knew it." And beneath all of it was a strange ache I had not planned for. Not regret. Something harder to categorize. Grief maybe for the final death of the fantasy that my family would one day correct itself without being forced. Revenge stories are satisfying when told in one sentence. In real life, the victory arrives carrying a body. By 1 a.m., Meridian Risk's emergency statement had been released. By 1:20, Lucas had deleted his social media. By 2 a.m., the board had suspended him pending investigation. I sat on my couch in the dark with my shoes still on and realized no one had asked me the question that actually mattered. How many times had I tried to solve this quietly before I set fire to the lie? The next 72 hours were worse for Lucas than anything I could have invented because public humiliation is one thing, institutional consequences are another. Meridian Risk's board moved with the speed of people who suddenly understand their own names might be attached to the wreckage. By New Year's afternoon, Lucas was placed on immediate administrative leave. By the morning after that, the company's largest prospective partnership froze negotiations. Within the week, 2 investor groups threatened legal action over misrepresentation during fundraising conversations. Every confident little shortcut Lucas had taken to turn my work into his narrative became a breadcrumb trail straight to his own collapse. He tried apology first in the modern way, carefully drafted, vague, bloodless, a statement on LinkedIn about communication breakdowns, shared development environments, and deep regret for how certain contributions may have been perceived. It lasted 38 minutes before backlash forced it down. Then came the second version, written by someone smart enough to know he had no room left for fog. He admitted he had presented work derived from my architecture. He admitted he had excluded me from strategic conversations. He even admitted that personal family dynamics had shaped professional decisions. What he still would not say was the central truth that he had counted on my silence because I was family and because women are so often trained to confuse discretion with dignity. The part that satisfied people most was the part one had the least to do with. Once the story broke, others began speaking. A former product lead described Lucas's habit of borrowing frameworks in meetings and reframing them as executive synthesis. A compliance director detailed how female staff were routinely asked to be more collaborative when they challenged attribution. A junior engineer sent Mara old Slack screenshots where Lucas referred to me as founder era, brilliant but too emotionally rigid for scale. There is nothing more dangerous to a polished fraud than a microphone handed to patterns. By New Year's week, Lucas was no longer a misunderstood executive under pressure. He was becoming what he had always feared most, a cautionary example. His personal life split open almost as fast. His wife, Elise, moved out of their condo in Chicago with their son after lawyers began calling the house. She later sent me a short message I still think about. "I'm sorry I ever believed the version of you I was given." My parents, who had spent years treating Lucas's ambition like evidence of destiny, suddenly found themselves uninvited from the very circles they had used him to impress. Friends who once praised his drive now called him reckless. Men my father had boasted to on golf courses stopped returning texts. My mother's New Year's photos disappeared from her account. That part should not have mattered to me, but I would be lying if I said I felt nothing watching the social architecture they prized more than honesty crack under the weight of actual facts. And yet the story did not become simple. Meridian Risk announced layoffs in the second week of January. Not total collapse, but enough to turn celebration into ash in my throat. These were not the people who had stolen from me. Many had done good work under bad leadership. I spent 2 straight days on calls with my co-founders at Blackthorn Analytics creating a priority hiring track for displaced Meridian staff in engineering, regulatory analysis, and client infrastructure. We could not save everyone. That haunted me. But we moved quickly enough to bring over 11 people within the month, including one single mother in Milwaukee who called me crying after signing her offer because she had been sure she would lose her home. That was when the real emotional cost arrived. Not from Lucas, not from my parents, from the bystanders, the people standing in the spray when the vessel finally shattered. I had known that truth would wound more than the liar. Knowing it in theory is not the same as reading messages from people whose rent suddenly became uncertain. I helped where I could. Letters, introductions, referrals, direct bridge payments in 2 cases through a quiet hardship fund we set up without publicity. Some nights, though, I still lay awake wondering whether there had been a version of justice that spared more people. I do not think there was. But uncertainty is part of the price of conscience. Anyone who tells you revenge feels clean has never had one that mattered. Lucas called me again 2 weeks after New Year's. For the first time in his life, he did not sound strategic. He sounded stripped. He had resigned by then, effective immediately, with the board preparing to pursue recoupment actions tied to compensation and misrepresentation exposure. He told me he had sold the condo, told me Elise had filed for separation, told me our parents were devastated. Then he said the line I had waited years to hear and found no joy in hearing. I knew you would stay quiet because you always protected the family more than I did. I did not respond for several seconds. Finally, I said, no, Lucas. I protected the illusion longer than I should have. The end.